AskReddit. What is your childhood memory that you thought was normal but realized it was traumatic later in your life? My mom used to give me enemas when I misbehaved. I didn't realize until I made a joke about it during my first semester of college and everyone looked at me in stunned silence that it was not a normal punishment. My friend's uncle wanted me and my friend to model clothes for a catalog. I didn't go but later discovered that store didn't and never had sold clothing. Turned out he was a pedophile and had been sexually abusing my friend for years. I think we were 8 or 9 at the time. My mother used to let me skip school a lot to take me to the hospital to see my older sister. We'd have hospital campouts where I'd sleep in the hospital bed with my sister and she'd sleep in the recliner chair provided for parents. It's now that I realize she'd do that because everyone, doctors, child psychiatrists, social workers, even friends and family, told her she needed to give me as much good memories with my sister as possible before she died. Surprisingly, that's not the traumatic memory. On those hospital campouts she used to make me memorize a nursery rhyme. She'd sing it to me, then make me sing it back to her over and over. It was to the tune of Hickory Dickory Clock, because I used to watch Play School a lot, so it was one I loved but one that wouldn't come up in school, so there was no risk of teachers asking me to play it on accordion then wondering why I was singing the wrong lyrics. She drilled it so much into my head that I still remember the lyrics. The first verse was about my dad, that he was abusive and that I couldn't be placed with him. The second verse was about my godmother, her name and her phone number, that she had documents to prove the abuse, and that she will take me in. I realize now that my father was severely abusive to my mother, and my mother was constantly trying to prepare me in case he killed her. Whether it looked like an accident or not, she needed me to be able to tell the police officers that he was abusive, that my godmother's number is his, that she has evidence and will take me in. I learned the nursery rhyme when I was 4. I guess it was the only way she could ensure a 4-year-old would memorize information like that. When my mum was having a bad day, before I'd leave by myself for primary school, she would say if I'm not here when you get back, you know why, implying that she would kill herself because of her stressful life. I'd spend the whole day at school worrying. My cousin's extremely religious mother would practice rapture drills with her. This consisted of her mom bursting into her room at like 3 AM, banging pots and pans together, and screaming it's the rapture. The rapture is happening. Will you be saved? She would then make my cousin confess her sins to her and then tell her that she would be going to hell for her sins. It terrified her. But she thought that this was a normal thing that all families' mothers do until adulthood when she casually mentioned it in conversation and the whole room went silent. Her now husband had to explain to her that no, that is not normal. My friends in junior school, I was around 8/9, used to joke about the funny things their parents would do, and myself, trying to join in, would describe how my late father would sit me in the bath with him, and get me to suck his PS. I thought it was a funny game with him, which I did when I was around 5/6. I realized around 10 years later while sitting in class in high school that I was being sexually abused and nearly had a breakdown. My dad had been dead for around 9 of those years, and my mother never ever brought it up with me. When I mentioned it to her, she became incredibly dismissive and defensive, briefly mentioning something about the police, but not pursuing it because he was due to pass soon afterwards. It ended up overshadowing any other memory I had of that man, as I realized he was a complete pose. When I was around 8, my best friend at the time used to steal bad food from her pantry and we'd go into her room and she'd then explain to me how we had to be skinny, because being skinny meant boys would like us, and so she would then meticulously read the backs of the cookie packs and count out every cookie and how many calories there were for each of us. She also was obsessed with shaving all her body and would try and pressure me into shaving my legs and arms. Once again, boys liked it when you were hairless. I never really grasped how bizarre it was for 8-year-olds to count calories and be hairless for boys. Years later, my primary school had a national scandal where 10-12-year-olds were sexually abusing each other on the mat during class, at lunchtime and any opportunity they had. I can remember lots of peer pressure for kids to finger each other and make out because that meant you were cool and liked by the hot boys. I was very fortunate to not be involved, and looking back it honestly so fucked up. Don't know if any of it was related, but just from 7-12 it was quite gross. My father and I had a game when I was a child. Help daddy remember what hospital he went to last. My father was mentally ill and would hurt himself purposely to get more anxiety, antipsychotic and pain drugs. There were 5 hospitals within a 2-hour drive of us, and in those days, early 90s late 80s, there were no computer systems to track him like there is now. He would literally break his own fingers, burn himself with oil, anything to get what he needed. And it was my job to help him remember, so he wouldn't get caught. After he took his life when I was 12, I had a lot of feelings and scary memories to deal with. It's been a long hard road, but I hope wherever his is, he's not in pain anymore. My father was an alcoholic. He literally drank every single day to the point of severe intoxication. Luckily he wasn't a violent drunk. I can't think of one time he even spanked me. The vast majority of my memories with him take place in a bar. I thought I was the luckiest kid ever. I got to hang out in the bar every weekend and get endless cans of soda and eat chips and beef jerky. I also got to hang out in his 1-bedroom apartment with him while he drank, chain smoked cigarettes in my immediate presence, and smoked weed. Luckily him and my mom were never together, so I was only there on weekends. He passed away when I was in my mid-20s from liver failure. I'm 33 now and a father of a 6-year-old boy who never got to meet his grandpa. I do not drink, at all. At least my father taught me what not to do. This one is perfect for me. It's something that should be considered traumatic, but honestly I think it's kind of funny now. So when I was about 5 or 6, my grandmother and my stepfather got into a huge argument. Both had short tempers and would get explosively angry. My grandmother was also a huge control freak. One day my grandmother was talking to my stepdad and my mom and asked us if we were ever going to replace the floor tiles in the bathroom. We were super broke at the time, so my stepdad said no and my mom said we would whenever they were able to. Well, my grandmother really wanted the tiles changed, so one day when they were both at work she came to tear up all of the floor tiles. When my stepdad got home my grandmother said to him, "You should appreciate me more. I just spent all day on my hands and knees doing men's work for you." When my stepdad saw it he was pissed and asked her why she did that. My grandmother then said, "You should appreciate me. Fuck you." Then she flipped him off. They then started screaming at each other and they were using some crazy language. My sister was also right there, and very recently we discussed it and we each remembered some different highlights. At one point my grandmother picked up a tiny axe she was using on the floor and said, "Don't make me use this on you." My stepdad ripped a picture of Jesus off the wall and held it to her face and said, "I bet this burns you, you devil." My grandmother said, "I bet you wish you were half the man I am." It all ended with my grandmother storming out and my family didn't talk to my grandmother for several months. I always joked to my sister that when she died that we should put that picture of Jesus up at her funeral. When I was young I was really good friends with a girl whose grandparents lived across the street, and we got along really well, and would hang out all the time. At some point, I was maybe 4 or 5 at the time, she invited me to her uncle's house, and they had a big above ground pool built into their deck, and we went swimming. Eventually we got out but we both wanted to get back in. And the uncle said if we wanted to go back into the pool we had to skinny dip. Again, we were both no older than 5. But we did. It took a long time for me to realize the severity of the situation, the implications. IDK. Half of me feels like it was harmless, half of me is like, damn, who the FK does that? Many things, but a few examples. Fathers don't teach their 10-year-old daughters French kissing. That they had to renovate the floors because they couldn't get our blood out. That social services took my brother out but didn't even ask about me. Never calling our parents mom and dad, but by their first names. Getting sedatives when we were crying too loud or had nightmares. For some reason I have been always scared of my mom. I have mental health problems and have been in and out of therapy for the past 7 years. I once mentioned to my dad how often I would have a babysitter, and my dad confessed that whenever I was with a babysitter, it was because my mom would go immediately to a bar and drink till she was blackout drunk, while my dad was working night shifts. My mom would then come home and mentally and physically abuse me, but my babysitter made a closet game where I would hide in the closet until my dad got home to calm her down. My babysitter eventually called CPS, and my mom went into AA. She's doing better now, but she still refuses to give up alcohol, and still mentally abuses me to this day. It sucks, but whenever I see that babysitter, who's now in college, I give her the biggest hug, because I think without her, I probably wouldn't be here right now. For some clarification, my mom suffered from bipolar disorder, and always blamed that in her actions. I still don't like her, but I don't have a choice to move out, because I'm only 16. But on the bright side, with the help of therapy and sadly a plethora of psych ward stays from multiple suicide attempts, I am doing better and have been clean from self-harm for about 1.5 years now. You have been visited by the high bandwidth husky. You will be blessed with fast browsing speeds and wide internet tubes. But only if you comment, load fast, papa, like and subscribe for more Reddit related videos.